Every year, the American car industry built millions of cars designed to last. Models that ran for a decade, sometimes two, evolving slowly, selling steadily, blending into the background of the road. But scattered through the 1960s and 1970s, a strange and fascinating group of cars did something almost none of the others did. They appeared for a single model year, and then they vanished, never to be built again. It is tempting to assume these cars disappeared because they failed, but that is almost never what happened. The truth is far more interesting. Each of these one-year cars was, in its own way, killed, and the reason each one died tells you something the history books usually skip. Because when you line them up and ask why they only lasted a year, you start to see the hidden machinery of the whole industry. The accidents, the racing wars, and the dying eras that decided which cars lived and which ones quietly disappeared after 12 short months. To understand these cars, you have to stop thinking of them as a list of rare oddities and start thinking of them as evidence. Evidence of four very different forces, each of which could end a car's life after a single year. And the first of those forces was not a competitor or a recession, it was the rulebook. By the end of the 1960s, the American muscle car was under attack from an enemy it could not out-accelerate: the insurance industry. Premiums on big, powerful engines were climbing so fast, the very people muscle cars were built for were being priced out of the cars they wanted. And so, a handful of clever, doomed machines were born specifically to dodge that trap. The clearest example is the 1970 Oldsmobile Rally 350. Oldsmobile tried something almost defiant. Instead of a huge, expensive engine, it built a car around a smaller 350 cubic inch V8, making 310 horsepower. Cheap enough to insure, but dressed to look utterly outrageous. Every Rally 350 was drenched in Sebring yellow. The bumpers were yellow, the wheels were yellow. It was, by design, one of the boldest looking cars of the entire era. Only around 3,500 were built before the experiment ended. The same rulebook that shaped the Rally 350 was, at the very same time, quietly strangling far more powerful machines. Consider the 1969 Mercury Cyclone CJ. Mercury, long stuck in Ford's shadow, finally wanted a true budget muscle car to fight the Plymouth Roadrunner. So it built one, and it did not hold back. Every Cyclone CJ came standard with the legendary 428 cubic inch Cobra Jet V8. 335 horsepower, 440 pound-feet of torque, a 4-speed manual, it could run the quarter mile in around 14 seconds. It was a genuinely serious machine. And yet, only around 2,100 were built, leaving it far rarer today than muscle cars that are household names. Mercury's shadow swallowed it whole. The 1977 AMC Hornet AMX. The AMX badge had once meant real performance back in the late 1960s, but by 1977, the muscle era was dead, emissions rules were tightening, and AMC could only offer the illusion of speed. The Hornet AMX was a one-year-only package built on a humble hatchback, loaded with aggressive styling, a front air dam, fender flares, body stripes, rally wheels, a car engineered, in AMC's own spirit, to look fast even when it was standing still. The optional V8 was available only with an automatic, because certifying a manual version for emissions was too expensive to justify. Around 5,200 were built. It is the perfect fossil of an industry being forced to walk away from the very thing that once made it exciting: the 1971 Pontiac GTO Judge convertible. The Judge had been the loudest, proudest face of the muscle car at its peak. But by 1971, with insurance, emissions, and rising prices all closing in at once, the market for a wild, expensive convertible muscle car had nearly evaporated. So when Pontiac sent the Judge convertible into that storm, almost no one bought it. Only 17 were ever made. A car that had once defined an entire culture left the world in a whisper, making it one of the rarest muscle cars Detroit ever produced. So the rulebook was the first killer. But the second force could not have been more different, because some of these cars were never planned at all. They were born by accident. The purest example is one of the strangest stories in American car history, the 1973 Jeep Super Jeep. It simply ran out of parts, specifically the aluminum-styled wheels used on its popular Renegade models. A normal company might have paused production and waited. It took the standard CJ5, gave it bold, patriotic graphics, large stars, a 304 cubic inch V8, and plain-styled wheels, and sold it as a special edition. Production lasted only a few months in 1973. The records are so incomplete that no one knows the exact total, and most historians believe fewer than 300 were built. The second accidental car was born not from a shortage, but from a sales pitch. The 1964 Rambler Typhoon. AMC had just spent around $45 million, an enormous sum for a small company, developing a modern new 6-cylinder engine, and it wanted the world to notice. So it built the Typhoon for one reason only: to be a rolling advertisement for that engine. Under the hood sat the new 232 cubic inch 6, modest today, but a real leap over AMC's ancient engines that traced back to the early 1940s. Just 2,520 were built. The car was never the point, the engine was. And once the engine was launched, the Typhoon had no reason to exist. A close cousin followed in 1967. The Rambler Rogue convertible. AMC, trying to answer the question of whether a Rambler could ever be considered cool, built a one-year-only drop top on its compact American platform. With reclining bucket seats and engines ranging up to a 343 cubic inch V8, a lightweight compact convertible with that much power was genuinely quick. AMC quietly testing the performance waters before it committed for real. The rulebook and the accident. But the third force that killed these cars was the opposite of an accident. It was a deliberate, calculated weapon in a war most people never saw. In racing, there is a rule as old as the sport itself. If you want to race a car or an engine, you usually have to sell a certain number of them to the public first. To race it, you must build it. And that single rule produced some of the most extreme one-year cars ever made. Machines built not because anyone expected to sell many, to be legal on the track. The most spectacular is the 1969 Dodge Charger Daytona. To dominate NASCAR's high-speed superspeedways, Dodge took a Charger and gave it a radical pointed nose cone and a towering rear wing, turning a street car into an aerodynamic missile. It worked so well, it became the first NASCAR car to break 200 miles per hour in testing. But to be allowed to race it, Dodge had to sell it. So it built just enough, only around 503 of them, for 1 year only. Dealers struggled to sell these strange winged cars at the time. Today, they command 7-figure prices at auction. The thing built only to satisfy a rulebook became one of the most valuable American cars in history. A quieter homologation story is the 1968 Mercury Cougar XR7-G. Mercury dealers wanted a piece of the Shelby Mustang magic, so a special performance Cougar was created, carrying the name of the racing driver, Dan Gurney. It is worth being honest here. Gurney himself later said he had little to do with the car, beyond lending his name to the advertisements. The real connection ran through Carroll Shelby's organization, and the cars were finished at a specialist facility with fog lights. Only around 619 were built, with roughly 200 of them sent to Hertz as rent-a-racers. It remains one of the rarest and most overlooked performance Cougars ever produced. And that leaves the fourth and final force, perhaps the most poignant of all. Some of these cars did not die because of rules or accidents or racing. They died simply because they arrived too late, the last spark of an era already going dark. No car captures this better than the 1977 Pontiac Can-Am. It was shaped by Jim Wangers, the same marketing genius who had helped build the legend of the Pontiac GTO years earlier. His idea was simple: take a mid-size Le Mans, give it Trans Am attitude, and recapture some of the old fire. The result, in 1977, looked spectacular. Finished in white with bold red, orange, and yellow graphics, a shaker hood scoop, and a rear spoiler. But it arrived in the depths of the malaise era, when real performance had been all but legislated out of existence. Only 1,377 were built before it disappeared after a single year. The Can-Am was a beautiful gesture made to a party that had already ended. And here is what all 10 of these cars, across all 4 of these forces, finally tell us. We tend to believe that the cars worth remembering are the ones that lasted, the long-running models, the steady sellers, the names that survived for decades. But there is another kind of greatness that only a one-year car can have. A car that lasts a single year is never given the time to be watered down. It is never softened by a committee, never compromised to survive a changing market, never slowly sanded into something safer. It is a pure, frozen snapshot of exactly what its makers believed in one specific moment, captured before the world could talk them out of it. The one-year wonders did not fail. They simply burned at full brightness, once, and were gone. And that is precisely why, decades later, we cannot look away from them. So the next time someone tells you a car only lasted a year because it failed, remember what 1 year really means. These are the kinds of machines that vanished before the world ever truly saw them. If stories like this are why you love old cars, subscribe. There are far more of them waiting on the channel.